My children called me a toxic mother because I worked 3 jobs to provide for them instead of being there every second. They used my guilt to put me in a nursing home, then demanded I sign over my house and savings. They thought they had broken me. They didn't know I was making one last phone call, to my lawyer, to ensure my real legacy went to someone more important than them. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Helen Sterling, and at 69 I thought I was finally approaching a season of rest. The kind of rest that seeps into your bones, easing the aches accumulated over a lifetime of hard labor. I was a widow, my dear Frank gone for over a decade, and my 2 children, Anthony and Brenda, were successful adults, living lives I could only have dreamed of for them. That success, I had always believed, was my life's greatest achievement, the fruit of my relentless, back-breaking work. But I was about to learn that the seeds of sacrifice can sometimes yield a bitter, poisonous harvest. It happened on a Tuesday, a day like any other, until my son Anthony, 44 and with the perpetually stressed look of a man who values money above all else, called and said he and his sister Brenda needed to have a family meeting. There was a cold formality in his tone that set my teeth on edge. They arrived at my small, tidy apartment that evening, not with the easy warmth of children coming to visit their mother, but with the grim, purposeful air of a delegation. Brenda, at 41, was a master of using modern therapeutic language as a weapon. She sat opposite me in my favorite armchair, her hands clasped, her expression one of deep, feigned concern. "Mom," Brenda began, her voice soft and full of a practiced empathy that didn't reach her eyes, "Anthony and I have been talking, and we are deeply concerned about you." I looked from her to Anthony, who stood by the mantelpiece, refusing to meet my gaze. "Concerned? About what, dear?" "About your well-being, your isolation," she continued. "We've been reflecting on our childhoods, on our family dynamic. And we've come to realize, with the help of some professional insights, that your relationship with us has always been somewhat toxic." The word hung in the air, a grotesque accusation. I, who had worked double shifts at the textile mill until my hands were raw to pay for Brenda's braces, who had taken on a weekend cleaning job to fund Anthony's university textbooks, was being called toxic. "You were never really there for us, Mom," Anthony chimed in, his voice resonating with a rehearsed victimhood. "You were always at work. Always tired. Always distracted. We essentially raised ourselves." "Your father worked 2 jobs, Anthony," I said, my voice quiet, a tremor of disbelief running through me. "After he passed, I worked 3. How else did you think we kept this roof over our heads? How did you think your university was paid for?" "That's the core of the problem, Mom," Brenda said, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with a strange, righteous fire. "You always made it about money, about providing. You were a workaholic. You were never emotionally available. That created a deep-seated feeling of abandonment in us, a trauma we are only now beginning to unpack. It was a masterclass in cruelty, twisting my lifetime of sacrifice into a narrative of neglect. They spoke of my long hours not as a testament to my love, but as a symptom of my emotional deficiency. My exhaustion was not the result of my labor for them, but a sign of my disinterest. They had taken the very fabric of my motherhood and rewoven it into a shroud of their own making, a story where they were the blameless victims and I, the toxic, absent matriarch. The conversation, if it could be called that, continued in this vein for what felt like an eternity. They pathologized my every action, every memory, until I began to feel dizzy, disoriented, the walls of my own living room seeming to close in. Was it true? Had I, in my desperate single-minded focus to give them a better life, failed to give them a better mother? The guilt, a familiar lifelong companion for any working parent, began to gnaw at me. Then came the final devastating blow. "And that's why, Mom," Anthony said, finally looking at me, his expression cold and decisive, "we've made a decision for you. For your own good. We don't think you're capable of living alone anymore, of managing your own affairs. You're becoming withdrawn, forgetful. It's not safe. We found a lovely place," Brenda added, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Evergreen Pines. It's a wonderful assisted living facility. They have activities, round-the-clock care. You'll be so much happier there, so much more managed. Managed. like an asset. Or a problem. I stared at them, my children, my flesh and blood, as they calmly, rationally, outlined their plan to have me institutionalized. They weren't just rewriting my past, they were erasing my future. My home, my independence, my dignity, all to be signed over to their care. I felt a wave of despair so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. They had done it. They had taken my own deepest insecurities as a mother and used them to justify their greedy, selfish desires. I was too tired, too heartbroken, too riddled with the guilt they had so expertly cultivated to fight back. In that moment I believed them. I believed that I had failed them, that I was a burden, that perhaps this was all I deserved. A quiet room in a place called Evergreen Pines, a place to fade away while they managed the life I had worked so hard to build. My silence they took for consent. And in that silence I felt my life begin to slip away. The week leading up to my move to Evergreen Pines was a blur of quiet, organized dismantling. Anthony and Brenda, their intervention, a success, moved with a brisk efficiency that felt like a violation. They went through my small apartment, sorting my life into neat labeled boxes: keep, donate, and a cruelly large pile designated trash. I watched them from my armchair, a silent, hollowed-out spectator to my own erasure. My treasured collection of old jazz records, the ones my dear Frank and I had danced to in this very living room. Brenda held one up, blew a layer of dust from it and declared it ancient history, placing it in the donate pile. The heavy hand-stitched quilts my own grandmother had made, the ones that had kept my children warm through countless winter nights. So dusty, Mom, Anthony said with a dismissive sniff. They're probably full of mites. Donate. The sturdy oak desk where I had helped them with their homework, where I had meticulously balanced my budgets to pay for their every need. Too bulky, Brenda pronounced. We'll get you a small modern writing table at Evergreen Pines. Trash. Each decision was a small, sharp cut. They were not just clearing out an apartment. They were curating a new, more convenient version of their mother. One with fewer possessions, fewer memories, fewer inconvenient claims on their time and their future inheritance. And I, steeped in the bitter tea of their accusations, let them do it. The guilt was a constant, suffocating companion. Had I been a toxic mother? Had my relentless work schedule, my single-minded focus on providing, truly been a form of neglect? I replayed their childhoods in my mind, searching for evidence of my failure. I remembered the school plays I had missed because of a late shift, the parent-teacher meetings I'd been too exhausted to attend, the nights I'd come home long after they were asleep. At the time, each missed moment had felt like a necessary sacrifice, a small price to pay for their future security. Now my children had reframed those sacrifices as a pattern of emotional abandonment. And in my current state of grief and confusion, their narrative felt horrifyingly plausible. The day they drove me to Evergreen Pines, the sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. The facility itself was clean, sterile, and smelled faintly of bleach and despair. It was filled with other elderly people, their faces holding a similar look of quiet resignation. My room was small, with a single window overlooking a manicured, perfectly lifeless lawn. It was furnished with a narrow bed, a small dresser, and the modern writing table Brenda had promised, a flimsy piece of particle board that wobbled if I leaned on it too heavily. They settled me in with a brisk, cheerful efficiency, as if they were dropping a child off at summer camp. They unpacked a few of my things, my clothes, a handful of approved non-cluttering photographs. Then came the final goodbyes. "Now, Mom, you have everything you need," Brenda said, her voice full of a bright, false cheerfulness. "There are activities every afternoon. And the nurse will be by with your medication. We'll call you next week to see how you're settling in." Anthony patted my shoulder awkwardly. "It's for the best, Mom," he said, his gaze not quite meeting mine. "You'll be safe here." And then they were gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silent, beige room. I sank onto the edge of the stiff, unfamiliar bed, the silence pressing in on me. Safe? Was this what safety felt like? This quiet, orderly erasure of a life? This slow, gentle fading into irrelevance? The first few weeks were a descent into a profound, gray loneliness. I kept to myself, my guilt a heavy shroud. I listened to the stories of the other residents, stories often filled with a similar, quiet heartbreak of children who were too busy, of homes that were too much to manage. I saw myself reflected in their tired eyes, and the sight was terrifying. Was this my future? A slow, gentle decline into a nameless, faceless old woman. My past, my sacrifices, my very identity, all packed away in a box labeled donate. I missed my grandchildren with an ache so fierce it was a physical pain. I had asked Anthony and Brenda if the children could visit, but they had a ready excuse. "Oh, Mom, it's not a good idea to bring them here just yet," Brenda had said. "We don't want to upset them. Let's let you get settled first." It was just another way of isolating me, of controlling the narrative, of ensuring my grandchildren only knew the version of me their parents wanted them to see. My initial anger, the spark that had tried to ignite during their intervention, had been completely extinguished by the cold, damp reality of this place. All that was left was a deep, sorrowful acceptance. They were right. I had failed them. I had been a workaholic mother. I had been absent. And this quiet, lonely room, this slow, managed decline, this was my penance. This was what I deserved. I had no fight left in me. I was just Helen Sterling, a toxic mother, a resident of Evergreen Pines, waiting with a quiet, heartbreaking resignation for my story to end. The days were measured not by joy or purpose, but by the relentless schedule posted in the hallway. 8 a.m. breakfast, 10 a.m. chair exercises, 12 p.m. lunch, 2 p.m. bingo, 4 p.m. quiet time, 6 p.m. dinner. It was a life of managed, placid decline, and for the first few weeks I surrendered to it. The guilt my children had so skillfully instilled in me was a powerful sedative. I truly believed I had failed them, and that this sterile, lonely existence was my just and fitting punishment. Anthony and Brenda would call once a week, their voices full of a bright, artificial cheerfulness. They'd ask about the food, the activities, if I was making friends. They never asked if I was happy. They never asked if I wanted to come home. They spoke to me as one might speak to a child at a boarding school they had no intention of ever visiting. Their calls were not for my benefit. They were to assuage their own consciences, a weekly 10-minute performance of filial duty. I missed my grandchildren with a fierce, physical ache. I missed their laughter, their hugs, the chaotic, joyful energy they brought into my life. But my requests to see them were always met with the same flimsy excuses. "They're so busy with school, Mom. It's not a good environment for children here. We don't want to upset your routine." They were systematically, cruelly, cutting me off from the only pure source of joy I had left. It was during the 4th week of my confinement that the true, unvarnished reason for my exile was finally, brutally revealed. Anthony and Brenda arrived for a rare in-person visit. They didn't bring flowers or my favorite pound cake. They brought a large manila folder and an air of grim, businesslike purpose. They sat opposite me in the small, sunless visitors' lounge, their faces devoid of their usual forced cheerfulness. "Mom," Anthony began, getting straight to the point, his tone all business. "Now that you're settled here and your long-term care is managed, it's time to be practical about your estate." "My estate?" I repeated, a small knot of unease tightening in my stomach. "Yes," Brenda said, pulling a sheaf of papers from the folder. She slid them across the table towards me. "Your house, your pension, your savings. It's all just sitting there, not being properly managed. It needs to be consolidated, invested wisely. For your future care, of course," she added a little too quickly. "And for the family's future." I looked down at the papers. They were legal documents. Power of attorney forms, property transfer agreements, documents that would give them complete, unrestricted control over everything I had spent my life working for. "We need you to sign these, Mom," Anthony said, his voice firm. "It's the sensible thing to do. You're in here, you can't manage a house, you can't keep track of investments. We can handle it all for you. It'll be one less thing for you to worry about." I stared at them, at my children, my flesh and blood, so eager to get their hands on my assets. The picture suddenly became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't about my toxic mothering. This wasn't about my inability to care for myself. This was about money. It had always been about money. They had used my own deep-seated guilt as a mother, my fear of having failed them, as a tool to manipulate me, to get me out of the way so they could get their greedy hands on my house, my pension, my savings. The intervention, the crocodile tears, the talk of my emotional unavailability. It was all a cruel, calculated charade. A grotesque performance designed to break my spirit, to make me compliant, to clear the path for them to plunder my estate while I was still very much alive. And as I looked at their impatient, avaricious faces, Something inside me, something I thought had been extinguished forever, began to stir. It was a tiny, flickering ember of the old Helen, the one who had raised them alone, the one who had faced down life's challenges with a quiet, unyielding strength. The guilt that had been my constant companion for weeks was suddenly, miraculously, burned away by a white-hot, clarifying rage. They hadn't just insulted me. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had orchestrated a campaign of psychological warfare against their own mother for profit. They had tried to make me believe I was crazy, that I was a failure, all so they could steal from me. I looked down at the papers, then up at their expectant faces. So this is what it was all about, I said, my voice quiet but no longer trembling. It was as cold and as sharp as a shard of ice. Not my toxic mothering. Not my inability to cope. But this. I tapped the papers with a single finger. My house. My money. Brenda had the audacity to look offended. Mother, that's not fair. We are just trying to help, to manage things for your own good. My own good. I let out a short, harsh laugh. You put me in this waiting room for death. You isolate me from my grandchildren. You systematically dismantle my self-worth, and you call it helping? No, this is not help. This is a heist. Anthony's face hardened. We are your children, Mom, he said, his voice a low threat. You owe us. For the childhood you never gave us because you were always at work. That was it. That was the final, unforgivable blow. My sacrifice, the very thing that had clothed and fed him, was now being used as a justification for his greed. The ember of my anger roared into a full-blown inferno. I pushed their papers back across the table. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice ringing with a strength that made them both flinch. My debt was paid in full, every single day for 20 years, with my aching back, my ruined health, and my lonely nights. You, on the other hand, you are about to find out what a real debt looks like. They stared at me, stunned by this sudden, unexpected transformation. The sad, compliant old woman was gone. In her place sat a matriarch whose eyes were blazing with a righteous fury. You want my house? I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. You want my pension? My savings? You will get none of it. Not one red cent. I stood up, my body still aching but my spirit soaring. Now get out. Get out of this room. And don't come back until you are summoned by my lawyer. They left, sputtering, shocked, their carefully laid plans in tatters. I stood by the window of my small room, watching them scurry away, no longer the powerful, concerned children, but the thwarted, grasping heirs they truly were. The battle wasn't over, I knew that. But for the first time in a very long time I felt like myself again. I had found my fight. And I had no intention of losing. The weeks following my explosive confrontation with Anthony and Brenda were a quiet declaration of my own Cold War. They had expected a grieving, guilt-ridden mother whom they could easily manipulate into signing away her life. They had instead awakened a sleeping giant, a woman who had spent a lifetime managing crises and who was now for the first time focused solely on her own survival and her own justice. The first thing I did was make a phone call. Not to a friend, not to my sister, but to a name I had kept tucked away for years. Arthur Croft, the sharpest, most respected estate lawyer in the city, a man whose reputation for being a pit bull for the underdog was legendary. I had met him once years ago at a fundraiser. I had been impressed by his intelligence and his no-nonsense integrity. Mr. Croft, I began, my voice clear and firm when he came on the line. My name is Helen Sterling. I am currently a resident at the Evergreen Pines facility. I believe my children are attempting to fraudulently gain control of my assets by painting a false narrative of my incompetence. I require your immediate assistance. Arthur Croft, true to his reputation, was at the nursing home the very next day. He was a tall, distinguished man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. He listened to my story in my small beige room, his expression growing grimmer with each detail I recounted. The toxic mother intervention, the calculated isolation, the final brazen demand for my assets. I showed him the documents they had tried to make me sign. He examined them, a small, humorless smile on his lips. Mrs. Sterling, he said, this is a classic and rather clumsy case of attempted financial elder abuse. They are building a paper trail of your supposed decline to justify seizing control. It's disgusting. But, he added, his eyes meeting mine, it is also very, very beatable. Especially by a woman who is as clearly lucid and resolute as you are. His words were a balm to my wounded spirit. For weeks, my children had tried to make me believe I was losing my mind. This powerful, intelligent man saw me in my sterile nursing home room and saw strength. "I don't want a messy public fight, Mr. Croft," I told him. "I am not well. My health is a constant battle. I don't have the energy for a protracted war. I want a quiet, decisive victory. I want to secure my legacy, and I want to teach my children a final, unforgettable lesson." "I understand completely, Helen," he replied, his tone softening. "A quiet checkmate is often the most satisfying. And in your case, the most effective tool we have is your last will and testament." And so my quiet revenge began to take shape. It would not be a lawsuit, not a dramatic courtroom showdown. It would be a silent, legal masterstroke, a truth that would only be revealed when it was too late for them to do anything about it. With Mr. Croft's expert guidance, I began to restructure my entire estate. We worked discreetly, communicating through his secure online portal, which I accessed from the nursing home's small, dusty library computer late at night. I, who had been deemed incompetent, was now managing a complex series of legal and financial maneuvers. My old will, a simple document that left everything to be divided equally between Anthony and Brenda, was revoked. My new will was a work of art, a testament to my true wishes, a final, definitive statement of my values. I spent hours on the phone with my financial advisor, another professional Mr. Croft had recommended. We consolidated my assets. The proceeds from the house I would instruct to be sold upon my death, my pension survivor benefits, my secret savings account they knew nothing about. The total, even I was surprised to see, was substantial. A lifetime of hard work and careful saving had indeed amounted to something significant. Then came the most important decision. Where would this legacy go? Not to the ungrateful children who had called my sacrifice toxicity, who had seen my life savings as their personal slush fund. No. My legacy, I decided, would go to the future. My grandchildren. Anthony's 2 boys and Brenda's daughter. They were innocent in all of this, the children I had been so cruelly barred from seeing. They were the ones who deserved the chances my hard work could provide. Mr. Croft drafted the documents with surgical precision. My entire estate would be placed into a single ironclad trust upon my death. The trust would be managed not by my children, but by a professional, neutral third-party trustee. The funds would be used exclusively for the health, education, and well-being of my 3 grandchildren. There were strict clauses. The money could be used for university tuition, for a down payment on a first home, for medical emergencies, for starting a business. But not a single penny could ever be accessed directly by, or for the benefit of, their parents Anthony and Brenda. They were to be the guardians of their children's good fortune, but never its beneficiaries. My revenge was not to punish my grandchildren, but to empower them, to give them the opportunities their parents had so callously taken for granted, and in doing so to bypass my own children completely. The final piece of the puzzle was a letter. A letter to be opened by Anthony and Brenda upon my passing, along with the will. I wrote it myself, my hand steady. It was not a letter of rage, but of profound, heartbreaking clarity. I wrote of my love for them, of the sacrifices I had made, not out of duty, but out of a deep, abiding hope for their happiness. And then I wrote of their betrayal, of how they had twisted that love, reframed that sacrifice, and in doing so had forfeited their place in my legacy. My money was never what mattered, I concluded. My love was. You devalued both. So I have left my love and the fruits of my life's labor to the only ones who are still innocent, your children. I pray you will one day understand the lesson. The greatest inheritance I ever tried to give you was my love. And it is the one you so carelessly threw away. After signing the final documents with Mr. Croft, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I had done it. My final arrangements were made, my true legacy secure. My children, still waiting smugly for me to crumble, for me to sign over my life to them, had no idea that they had already lost. They were fighting a war that was already over. A war where their toxic old mother had achieved a silent, absolute, and devastating checkmate. The weeks following my secret meeting with Mr. Croft were a quiet, tense waiting game. I returned to my routine at Evergreen Pines, the placid, condescending rhythm of life in the nursing home, a stark contrast to the powerful, decisive actions I had just taken. Anthony and Brenda, furious after our last confrontation, had retreated into a hostile silence. They no longer visited. Their weekly wellness check calls ceased. It was clear they were biding their time, likely conferring with their own lawyers, plotting their next move in their campaign to have me declared incompetent. Let them plot. Their war was already lost. They just didn't know it yet. They made their final desperate move about a month later. I received a formal, threatening letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. It was a letter of intent, stating that if I did not willingly agree to a managed care and financial conservatorship agreement with my children, they would be forced to petition the court to have one appointed, citing my declining mental state, isolation, and inability to manage my own affairs. It was their last-ditch effort to intimidate me, to bully me into submission. I simply forwarded the letter to Mr. Croft. His response was swift and beautiful in its brutal efficiency. He sent them back a letter so cold, so legally intimidating, it all but dripped with ice. It stated that I, his client, was of perfectly sound mind, that my affairs were being handled by his esteemed firm, and that any attempt to file a frivolous conservatorship petition would be met with a vigorous and costly countersuit for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. He also subtly hinted that a public court battle would require a full, open disclosure of their recent behavior towards me, something he was quite certain they would prefer to avoid. After that, there was only silence. A deep, profound silence from their end. They had played their last card, and it had been trumped by a legal power they hadn't anticipated and couldn't afford to fight. They were beaten. My health, however, continued its slow, inexorable decline. The quiet life in the nursing home, free from my children's daily toxicity, brought me a measure of peace, but it could not undo the years of overwork, of stress, of a body pushed beyond its limits for their sake. My cough worsened. The pain in my joints became a constant, nagging presence. It was during this time that I made a new friend. A young nurse's aide named Maria, a girl with kind eyes and a gentle touch, who saw past the difficult label my children had tried to pin on me. She'd sit with me in the evenings, reading to me when my own eyes grew too tired, listening to my stories of the past, of my Frank, of raising my children in happier times. She became a small, bright light in my fading world. And then one evening my son called. It was the first time in months. His voice was different. The arrogance, the anger, it was all gone, replaced by a strange, hollow tone. "Mom," he began, "Brenda and we need to see you. We heard you're not doing well." A part of me, the foolish mother part that never truly dies, felt a flicker of hope. Had they finally realized the error of their ways? Had they come to apologize, to seek reconciliation before it was too late? They visited the next day. They looked diminished. Anthony had lost weight, his expensive suit now hanging on his frame. Brenda's face was drawn, her usual sharp confidence replaced by a weary anxiety. They brought a small, sad-looking bouquet of carnations. They sat, made awkward small talk. Then Anthony finally got to the point. "Mom," he said, his eyes fixed on his hands, we know we made some mistakes. We were under a lot of pressure. But we're still your children. Your family. And as your family, we think it's important that we start managing your end-of-life care, your final arrangements." He looked up, a hopeful, greedy light flickering in his eyes. "We need to know what to expect. From the will." There was the raw, unvarnished truth. They hadn't come to apologize for their cruelty. They hadn't come to check on my well-being. They had come as vultures, to assess the value of the carcass before it was even cold. A lifetime of love, of sacrifice, of a mother's hope, died in that moment. The last flicker of affection I held for them was extinguished, replaced by a vast, cold emptiness. I looked at them, my children, these strangers with the familiar faces, and I gave them my final lesson. "I did make my final arrangements, Anthony," I said, my voice quiet but clear as a bell. "My will is signed, sealed, and legally unassailable. And I have indeed left my entire estate to the people I trust most, the people who represent the future of this family." A look of triumphant relief washed over their faces. They thought I meant them. "Yes," I continued, savoring the moment, the final devastating turn of the screw. "Everything, the house, the pension, the savings, it will all go into a trust. For your children. My grandchildren. With a clause, a very strict one, that you two, their parents, can never, ever touch a single penny of it." Their faces crumpled. The shock, the horror, The dawning comprehension of their total and absolute defeat was a terrible, beautiful thing to behold. You can't do that. Brenda stammered. I can, I said, a small, sad smile on my lips. And I have. You called me toxic, a bad mother. You told me I was never there for you. So I have honored your assessment. I have removed my toxic influence and my toxic money from your lives permanently. Now, my legacy will go to the ones who are still innocent, the ones who have not yet learned the bitter lessons of your greed. I rang the small bell for the nurse. My children are leaving now, I said calmly. They were escorted out, speechless, their faces ashen. I watched them go, two ghosts departing from a life they had so carelessly, so cruelly thrown away. The war was over. I had won. But it was a victory that felt in my heart like the most profound and devastating loss of all. My final days were spent in a state of quiet, almost serene detachment. The legal and emotional battles were over. The sound and fury of my children's greed silenced by the cold, clear finality of my last will and testament. The Evergreen Pines nursing home, once my prison, became a surprisingly peaceful place of refuge. The staff, who had likely heard whispers of the family drama from the legal visits, now treated me with a new, gentle respect. Maria, the kind aide, continued to be my comfort, reading to me from my favorite books of poetry, her presence a quiet testament to a kindness I had found where I least expected it. Anthony and Brenda did not try to contact me again. The door had been firmly, irrevocably shut. I knew through the family grapevine that still managed to filter news to my sister Martha, that they were in a state of shock and disbelief, alternating between blaming each other and blaming me for their self-inflicted financial ruin. They had been so certain of their inheritance, so confident in their ability to manipulate their failing mother, that the reality of their disinheritance was a blow from which they could not recover. Their future, which they had so arrogantly assumed would be built upon my assets, was now a blank, terrifying slate of their own making. There was a profound sadness in that knowledge, a mother's eternal grief for the children she had lost. But there was no regret. My decision, I knew with a clarity that transcended my physical weakness, had been the right one. The only one. Mr. Croft, my lawyer, visited me one last time to ensure all my affairs were in perfect order. You are a remarkable woman, Helen, he said, taking my hand. Your children, they have no idea what they have lost. Oh, I think they do, Arthur, I replied with a faint, weary smile. They just think it's the money. My grandchildren. They were my final, most precious thought. I had asked Mr. Croft to ensure that the trust one had established for them was managed with the utmost care, that it would be a source of true opportunity, not unearned entitlement. It was to be for their education, for their health, for a down payment on their first homes, for anything that would build their character and secure their futures. It was my love, my life's work, leapfrogging a generation of greed to land where it truly belonged. I had also asked Mr. Croft to include, along with the will, my personal letter to my children, and another separate one for my grandchildren to read only when they were adults. To them I explained not the depths of their parents' cruelty but the depths of my love. I told them about their grandfather, about our dreams, about the sacrifices made not out of obligation, but out of a fierce, desperate hope for a better future. I told them that this inheritance was not just money, it was a legacy of that love, a love I was now passing directly to them. I prayed that they at least would understand its true value. As my energy faded, as the world began to soften at the edges, I felt a strange sense of peace. The story of my life had not been the one I had planned. It had been filled with more hard work, more sorrow, more betrayal than I had ever imagined. But the ending was my own. I had been called a toxic, absent mother. I had been deemed a failure. But my final act on this earth was one of profound, protective, and enduring motherhood. I was securing the future of my family's next generation. I was ensuring that the fruits of my life's labor would nurture new dreams, not feed old resentments. My revenge was not in their punishment, but in my own quiet, final act of love. A love they had been too blind to see, too selfish to accept. A love that would now skip over them entirely, a pure and powerful legacy for the innocent. They thought my mothering had been a failure. But my final act as a mother, as a grandmother, was, I believed, the most successful, most meaningful, and most triumphant act of my entire life. And with that thought I finally truly rested.